All right, was that perfect timing? Hello, this is Beth Clarke from CESA 2. Welcome to our Supporting Leadership for School Closing webinar today. I am the Senior Director of the Digital Leadership and Learning Center of Excellence, and we have our whole team here today to help support in any way possible and to kind of bring us all together to collaborate on this topic. So today I am using the tool Zoom, and as we go through our presentation and discussions, I'm going to just be giving you some tips along the way to use this tool, as most of us will be using some kind of video conferencing tool in the near future. So welcome. What I'm wondering is, as we go through some of the logistics, if you could just type in your name and just say hello, introduce yourself in the chat feature. And the chat feature is right, if you hover down on the bottom of your screen, you'll see this chat feature pop up. And if you click on it, you'll get a pop-up window. Ah, there we go, we're getting some hellos. The other couple things, just so you know, we have muted your audio at this point, but if you would like to speak up, you certainly can unmute and talk to the group by just clicking on this icon, and then your video on and off. So for this kind of conference, you can choose to have your video on or off. It's totally up to you. If you are doing this with students, I really suggest that the norm be that they turn their video on. We're moving into a time where, kids are used to being in a social atmosphere, and they're moving into possibly a little isolated atmosphere. So as much face-to-face contact as we can provide for students would be wonderful. And then I always start with Zoom norms or any video conferencing norms so that the students or participants all understand what is expected as we go through. So just again, modeling. So I'm sharing my screen right now, and if there's any resource at some point that you would like to share up, what we'll do is we'll just put that in the chat, and Valerie has graciously said that she will monitor the chat for us today so we can actually have these resources as well. So use the chat to add conversation, as we were talking about. We may break out into separate rooms. They're called breakout rooms, and I can show you how to do that as well. If there is a need or a want to do that, to have smaller, more intimate conversations. And then we're actually going to be using a collaborative doc today to share ideas, resources, and questions. That document was this right up here. So if you haven't opened this document, Valerie, could you put that in the chat for us, please? So it's here on the intro screen. So if you're going to share a document with the group, this is actually set up so that everybody can edit on this document. So you certainly can add any resources, questions, needs as we go through. Thanks, Val. And oh, you know what, Valerie, the capitals are really important in there. It's case sensitive. Or maybe that's just a link. If you click on it and off you go. Anyway, so you can share documents and so on. So there's this collaborative feeling in a webinar situation. And then we'll keep our mics muted until there's something that you'd like to offer, just because of background noise. We don't want any distractions as we go through. So those are the norms for today. If anybody has any other norms they'd like to share in the chat, you certainly can do that. So today with us, we are fortunate to have many of our team members, and we have Dan Hanrahan and Tracy Elger, who are going to give you a welcome as well. Take it away, Dan.
All right, I was actually waiting for Tracy to come in.
Yeah, and I was talking, except I had muted myself. Dan also informed me earlier that my video was sideways, so I'm living in this new world. No,
And
I'll go ahead
that's
and just welcome everybody. I'm CESA 2's Executive Director of Integrated Programs and Services, and I have the fortunate luxury of working with all these great people at CESA 2. I know that this idea for this webinar was originally spawned from a what if meeting that Beth had with curriculum directors and other technology directors on Friday. And by Friday night, our what if planning was actually, it's happening, it's here. What do we do now? And so some of the things that people had asked for, ideas for how to educate in certain content areas during this time, what does virtual learning really mean, those kind of things. We thought we have some ideas as a consulting staff. We have ideas of a system that we can share with you, resources. That's what we wanted to share with you all today. And really just start the conversation of how we can mutually support each other when we're kind of in this unprecedented time. And some of us are being thrown right into this without a lot of background. So I'm really, really happy that most of our consultants were able to join us today. We'd love to field your questions. We'd love to support you any way we can, and then together create this system where we can move forward and mutually support each other through this time. So thank you for being here this morning.
Thank you, Tracy. Wonderful. And as we take a look at our team, I just wanted you to see our centers of excellence. These are all the different areas. If you can see, it's a little bit small font here, but we're trying to represent somebody from each of these areas today. So as we go through some of the questions that you may have or unmet needs that you may have that we can help support in any way, or today we could document your needs and then further process and create some kind of module or learning that could come at a later date. So with that in mind, we come together as a region to support each other, to share ideas, and needs to build future supports, just as I was saying. So one of the things I thought that we could kick this off with is the planning document that we used last week. And if you go to this bit.ly, it will go to this document right here, pandemic planning. And if you take a look at this, these are actually the documents we used last week in a meeting, and then here are some other resources. But it goes through, you know, fact resources on the COVID virus, and then also some planning resources. Now, last weekend was a big weekend and going into this time right now for planning for districts. So I'm wondering right now, as far as the planning resources go, how are you feeling? If you want to just put this in the chat, where are you at with your planning process? And this morning on my way here, I was listening to the radio and they were talking about Janesville's plan. And so, you know, just a few things that they are taking devices home. All of the students are off today and were off yesterday. They're coming to school tomorrow, family members to pick up a device, but they are not doing continuity of learning. Instead, they're doing some resources until they know more, because their spring break is next week. And another piece that they talked about is providing food for their students. And one thing I learned, I think we're learning every day, right? One thing I learned today was that they can provide food for only the students who come at that moment. So let's say in your family, if you have 3 children and you have an older child that can go and pick up the food for all 3, they can only give that student their meal. So everybody has to be present. All of the students and children have to be present in order to get food. So that was new learning for me this morning. So I'm sure we all have new learning that we can share with each other. as we go through this planning process. So Val, what are we looking at in the chat right now?
So Janet from Delavan is just sharing that she's feeling really good about where her district is. And I don't know, Janet, if you would like to share a little bit more about that.
Janet, we would love you to unmute and talk. That's wonderful to share.
And then John is following up with Oregon, and in that their plan is about the same as Janesville's.
This is Janet Beilman from the Delavan Schools. I know there are other highly qualified people online here that can probably speak better than I can, but our district was thoroughly prepared last week. We were getting kids online. I'm a middle school teacher, and they were able to kind of have a mock trial of what it would look like online at home, and I feel like they're really prepared for that now. It's still very, very overwhelming, but I think we're on the right track.
Janet, are you doing continuity of learning, or are you doing more enrichment?
Continuity of learning, 100%. Sticking right where we left off. Little review just to get them going, and they're familiar with the content in 8th grade math, and just continuing on with that. And so they start at a place where they feel safe and secure and with their knowledge, and we're going to start some new skills in the next couple of days.
Great. That is one thing that is being encouraged across the board, is to start slow and minimalist, actually. So if you are providing any type of teaching or resources, to cut it in half of what you typically do. They're also suggesting that the first couple of days that it's more playful learning and more investigative learning, and not high stakes type of learning, so that students can get used to learning at home, managing their environment, and getting on board when they can. So that's highly recommended as well.
I do feel the kids are embracing this better, actually, more than I thought. And I do have one student in particular who is autistic, and I know this new routine is tough for him, but ironically, he's the one who, when I said, I'm just not sure from a student standpoint how you can post this material, and he actually created a video this morning to share out. So it's been kind of cool in that respect. Although I am not a fan of online learning at all, I'm trying to embrace it.
That's awesome that your students stepped up, and, you know, to see them all collaborating. Actually, yesterday I saw a poem that a student wrote to teachers about this whole situation, and it's just so wonderful to see how everybody is empathizing with each other, right? And that's the piece too. Thank you, Janet, for sharing with us. Just really appreciate that.
Thank you. I'll mute myself again.
What else do we have here in the chat, Valerie?
So I did share a copy of Janesville's PDF. It takes you to the information that they've shared with their families in terms of where they're picking up devices and sort of the overall policies and such. I'm just searching for Delavan's to share with folks as well, as that seems to be working very effectively. And Ron is saying that he would mention that at the Dane County Public Health meeting this morning. Oh, I'm sorry, the question came up from Wanakee about distributing devices and materials, mm-hmm. and how to do that and sort of keep the groups to a minimum. And that's pretty much a summary of the chat right now.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one of the things actually they talked about with receiving food too is how, you know, they need to keep the social distancing happening. So just kind of knowing that there's going to be enough food and preparing enough food to make sure that not everybody shows up at 11. You know, if your window's from 11 until 1, just making sure that the message is out there that they will all be provided for. And I love that idea of shifts for students to come and get devices as well. So communication seems to be happening. Here are some templates as well, if anybody is interested in those. And then we get into continuity of learning. So Janet was mentioning that they're continuing where they left off, really trying to work hard on continuing the learning objectives of where they were at. And then some districts are choosing to do more of a learning resource right now. I know that that some of the bigger districts are doing that, especially if you have spring break around the corner, or if this week is spring break, that they're opting to do more of enrichment time, is what they call it. So just having learning resources for students, or possibly putting up, I call them choice boards for families, so that kids aren't climbing the walls at home, but actually have some productive things to do. And these things offer, these choice boards and options offer online as well as offline activities. So today I was on, and I'll share this with you, it's a Facebook group called Teaching. Val, tell me, is it?
Yeah, it is called, hang on, they were just up, Teaching During COVID-19.
That's it, yes.
And they had about 50 members Friday after the governor announced the closures, and they're up to 50,000 now.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And there was a science teacher who shared a scavenger hunt around the house, you know, the house and outside and so on. And I just thought, oh, this is fantastic. So there are so many resources for us to take a look at. So teaching during COVID-19, there are Twitter hashtags out there. That's why I was kind of, it's this one, the Twitter hashtag is teaching during the coronavirus, or coronavirus, that's a hashtag. But there are a lot of different resources for us to delve into as we start talking about what can we do. So here are just some resources. I know many of you probably have gone through some of these resources on starting to, or continuing that education. But these are here for you. But let's get back to the agenda here. So if you have any questions, or if you need clarification on any of those, actually I had clarification today, and I want to share this with all of you as it relates to Zoom. So a district had called and was wondering about the Zoom options. Because we're using Zoom right now, I want you to know that a lot of districts are going to this video conferencing tool, or they're either using Google Meet. So Zoom is offering all school districts through it's a special link that's actually on that sheet. Let me go back here, I'll show you. And this one right here, if you go to this link, it will verify that you are a school district, and it will lift the ceiling of 40 minutes for free access. So the one thing I want you to know about that, though, is that if you send this out to, let's say that you want to do an IEP and you send this out, or you want a gathering where people can access it by phone because they don't have a device to actually access the video component, it does not offer a free phone service, so it will not give you a phone number. That's under the free upgrade. So what I'm suggesting is that districts possibly at least have one for student services, that they actually pay for one Zoom Pro subscription, so that you can actually have parents and participants phone in. You only need one. Whoever is setting up the Zoom, that's the person who needs the Pro account. Any questions about that? That was a clarification I needed today, so I'm sharing it with you. As we get these new updates, we got to get them out to you as well. So anyway, so let's go back here. Questions or clarifications you have, and then let's go to this document that we started with here, ideas to share. And I can see that we're using this. So if all of you can go to this tab, let's jump on this document and let's just talk about if you have any ideas that you can share with the group. And feel free to unmute. I'm going to stop talking for a little bit so that you all can talk and share about what's going on in your district, or share any resources on this document. And don't be shy, by the way.
Hey, this is John in Oregon. The big thing we've had is, this is a question, it's about the special ed delivery. And specifically, one came up, is that if teachers are going to be using Google Classroom with a group of special ed teachers, yeah, thank you, Beth, for typing while I verbally process here. She brought up that a lot of the students she works with will need help from parents or caregivers at home, but then the parents and caregivers would have access to the Google Classroom and would be able to see the other children enrolled in the special ed class. And wouldn't that be a violation of the privacy components around special ed? So I was a little bit stumped by that, because I didn't know if there was a way in a Google Classroom to mask the I guess identities of the other people in the class.
Mm-hmm.
So if anybody knows that, or has any other, well, special ed is a real interesting conundrum.
Yes, right.
Providing a free, appropriate public education, as you know, but that was an interesting one that hadn't occurred to me yet. So if anybody knows a good way to do that in the classroom, that would be swell.
John, while people are thinking about that, we're also going to have a webinar Wednesday morning with attorney Tess O'Brien from Boardman Clarke, specifically around special education. And I shared that with superintendents and directors of special ed, and we can put the link in here too. But we can also ask that question of her tomorrow if you're not on that call.
Yeah, I think that is a great question. John, go ahead.
Oh, yes, our special ed and superintendent shared that with us, so I'm eagerly looking forward to that one tomorrow as well. Already signed up for it. Thank you for having that, Dan.
The only thing I can think of in Google Classroom is that you can, if you click on the members, you know, the participants in the classroom, that's when they'll pop up. I'm just thinking, in a stream typically, or in the classwork tab, typically you won't see other members of the classroom unless they're doing a discussion question. Then that would pop up, like if they're able to give each other feedback. Otherwise, you don't see that unless the student actually clicks on. But I don't think we can disable that option. Yeah, it is a great question. I will look into that as well, John. What other questions are out there? Questions or sharing options?
Yeah, there seem to be a lot of questions instructionally from teachers who teach in classes that might not be so conducive to online. So I saw there was a choir teacher, band teacher, shop teacher. So I think just as administrators, being mindful of those unique course deliveries and how we can support them.
Yes, this is Lenny. Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead, Lenny.
Hi. I've been getting a lot of questions about assessment, particularly math, because that's more difficult to just type up, you know, an assessment online. But, you know, what are people using for assessment?
So there's an extension called Equatio, and it's free. And it's wonderful actually for creating digital equations. Graphing, Desmos is another great graphing digital tool. And what I'm seeing is that if you can use the Equatio with Google Forms, so you make the equation, actually, now that I think about it, if you have the extension on, you actually can, it pops up in Google Forms. So those math teachers who are using Equatio, it'll pop up in Google Forms as they're creating questions, and they can make the equation right there. The other suggestion I would have for that is there are many whiteboard apps out called like Ziteboard and Awe app, where you can actually either independently like write out on a digital device, you can kind of write out the equation or your thinking, or you can do it collaboratively. So let's say that you wanted a group of students who are actually in their homes to work together on a problem and solve it. They can use something like that. What specifically, Lene, are you thinking with math? Are they saying they typically do everything out on paper, like the writing?
No, that you pretty much answered it, because the question I've been getting was, how do we assess students, like, similar to how we would do in the classroom, but they weren't sure how to do it because of the equations in math. So that might actually answer the question.
Yeah, that Equatio has been like transformative for digital math. Do we have any support for those band shop and, all of those more hands-on classes? What could we come up with for that?
A lot of people have been talking about video tools. They've been talking about some of the performing arts centers that are broadcasting. I know my sons are both in music classes, and they're watching TED Talks from different musicians. So it's not as performance-based in that regard, but they are doing some recordings and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a pretty simple tool that we can all start using, and hopefully when we're on the webinar with teachers too, we'll talk about Flipgrid. Flipgrid is one that can record somebody talking and their thinking, but also could record, somebody playing an instrument. It picks up, whatever is on the other side, and it's nice because teachers can push it out as an assignment, either through Flipgrid with a link or through Classroom, and it contains, there's a privacy piece, so it contains anything that is video recorded will be contained in that classroom.
I would also add that a lot of music teachers can really look at some of their standards that are not so performance-based, like their listening standards and their critiquing standards, and this is a great time to really meet those standards and offering performances that are available online for kids to watch and critique works well. But also, if teachers have the ability to Zoom with kids and do a private lesson over Zoom, that's also an option for a lot of music teachers for their private lesson part of it. The group performance obviously can't happen right now, but private lessons can still happen through Zoom.
Right, and my children are even having to find a buddy, and they're playing together via, Zoom or whatever face connected synchronous tools that they are using on their iPhones.
And I'm just thinking about art too. Art, I would love to see more kids just digging into, what they have around their house and building things, hands-on, and then taking a picture of that possibly with some kind of device and sharing that out in a Google Classroom or something like that. Or there are loads of digital free options now for art extensions. There are many art just regular websites. And I'm thinking like if they have an iPad, like, oh my gosh, there are a ton of apps. So it will be interesting to see how creative they can be using what's out there for free.
Yeah, I just, for my own kids, Mo Williams is an artist in residence right now in one of the museums, and he is offering a free lunchtime chat because of COVID-19 with kids and teaching them how to draw every day at 1 o'clock Eastern time. So I think that as long as teachers have the ability to research some things, there are lots of opportunities being offered right now by the museums. Doing museum virtual tours is another great way to get kids still engaged in art conversations, and then having them do some writing about the art conversation or about the art that they saw in the museum too. So there's so many resources being published all the time online for kids to access art. It's great.
Yeah, that is fabulous. Actually, I saw that on the Facebook group. What isn't it called? Mo Williams, Doodle with Mo Williams is I think what it's called. So I just think that is fabulous. It's wonderful.
And what a great tie-in to reading and art, so that people, I mean, there's some really positive things coming out of this too.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
Yeah, this is Mary Jo, and I just wanted to throw in, I agree with Terry as far as literacy goes. I mean, we just need to go back to those basics and think about reading, writing, listening, speaking, and language development. How can we coordinate and support kids in engaging with each other virtually to have conversations about things that maybe they haven't experienced before, or things that some have and others haven't. So all of those little video prompts, anything, any virtual tours, all of those virtual field trips are great opportunities for kids to learn a little bit of something and then have conversations about it or write about it, and can continue to support their literacy skills. So, I mean, the sky's the limit here as far as literacy goes, in my opinion, and a great opportunity to give kids the leadership roles of connecting with each other and collaborating with each other to develop their language and understandings.
There's a question in the chat, and I've seen this in the Facebook group a fair amount too, just the difference between Zoom and Google Hangouts and why one might choose one over the other.
Mm-hmm. So, my experience, I'm going to speak from my experience, is that Zoom is stabler. I feel like I do not have issues with audio, with video. The only time I have issues is if I'm in an unstable Wi-Fi area. I find that the breakout rooms are so easy to use, and I just never have issues with Zoom. When I am using Google Meet, since they're still, I mean, it is pretty new now. It used to be Hangouts, it's called Meet now. And there's still some bugs, and some, students can do, what was I just reading recently? Like they can actually like bump each other off or share their screen. Whereas here in Zoom, you really have more control. The instructor, whoever created and is the host, has more control of the environment.
Yeah, that's what Beth is saying too, that students have learned how to remove the other students or the teacher.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. What other questions? Ooh, Mary Jo, I see you put a museum in there. That's awesome. Valerie has the Kennedy Center. You know what, Audrey, why don't you unmute and talk a little bit about the English learner support? I know you have some resources and you have an upcoming webinar that everybody might want to register for.
Yes, thanks. So I was putting some information in the chat too, but I finally got back online to actually start adding to the web, the form leadership, the Google form here as well. So there's a couple different things that we're focusing on through the Language and Cultural Center. We will be hosting a webinar on Friday, and I'll attach the link, and we'll specifically be talking about, one, we'll sort of make sure we have a way to connect folks from different schools that are being sensitive to the needs of the multilingual learners in their schools in this online, working online. And then we'll talk about a lot of tips and strategies, as well as link to resources that will be beneficial for multilingual learners. Some of the ideas that we've talked about today are like, how do we support universal design in learning, text-to-speech options, visual displays, museum access, first and second language access. So we'll work on that. In addition to that, next week and into the future, the Language and Cultural team will be hosting office hours. And in those office hours, we'll have a chance for one-on-one or small group discussion with one of the members of the Language and Cultural team, with anybody who attends those office hours, to help individually problem solve or support particular concerns or interests or areas of how to provide access and engagement for language learners in their specific schools or settings. So those office hours will be from 9:30 till 11:30 every day from Monday through Thursday. And then we'll have a link through the calendar for people to sign up.
That's awesome. I love to hear that, that good stuff for support for our districts.
So if there's anything, if anyone has any areas of particular interest or questions they've had so far, please either add them to this document or of course send them our way. We've also established a Facebook page as well for links to online sources specific to multilingual learners as well. So.
Stephen, are you on with us today? As I was talking about math, I should have asked you if you had any other ideas. Are you on, Stephen?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi.
No, the ones that Renee shared, or the ones that you shared for Renee are great resources. There's some great lessons that can be facilitated virtually on Desmos, teacher.desmos.com, and they have lessons that align to Eureka and illustrative math as well for those districts that are using them. Flipgrid's great for some short assessments. You can ask students to show their work, have students comment on each other's work, set a time limit to 30-second, 60-second, 90-second responses. And then Equatio and the Zeitboard are great resources as well. And you could, with Zeitboard, you could even set up collaborative groups. So those are some of the things that come to mind for me right now.
What do you think about Kahn Academy? Are there any sites out there that would be appropriate for teachers to use as resources? I mean, where are you with? I know there are some others, like there's CK12, and you gave me a site the other day and I can't think of it offhand, but for Calc Help. Do you remember what I'm talking about, Stephen?
Yeah, Kahn Academy is a great resource, and then there's also another free resource and this is more geared towards skill practice, Delta Math, and you could set up a classroom, assign problems, class sets, etc.
Thank you. All right. So we've got lots of resources in the chat, as you can see, these coming up. And there are resources up here in the ideas to share, and we'll take those from the chat and put those in the ideas to share as well. Let's talk about what's up next. And we talked a little bit about questions, but really what we want to know here from CESA 2 is what are your most urgent unmet needs that we could kind of put our team together and try and create some kind of support. Is there anything that is urgent that we could help support with? So urgent needs, you'll see right here, if you want to take a minute and think about what are your most unmet urgent needs that either this group can process around or we can hold on to and see where we can find some support. You can put them in the chat too if you want. Okay, this is what I'm going to do. So this is going to be an instructional move that you can use when you are also doing a Zoom meeting. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to think about what are the urgent needs that are going on in your district right now or in your classroom, and think about maybe what are the top priority needs that bubble up, and go ahead and add those to the chat. So you can just put, typically in a Twitter chat or any kind of chat, we'll just put like Q1, that's the first question. And so our first question is really, what are those urgent needs that are popping up in your district? Go ahead and add those to the chat. And let's see if we can get, let's see what the trend is in the chat. Oh, Valerie did a question. Nice. What? Expecting from educators timeline.
Yeah, let me see. Oh my gosh, they look beautiful. Let me see. Put them in the fireplace. Yeah, good. I mean, there's no flowers right now. Let me see closer, please.
Janet, do you want to mute your mic for us?
I must have hit it.
Awesome. So these are really thoughtful questions that are popping up here. So just throwing this out to the group as we take a look at some of these questions. And thank you, Val, for putting them on our sheet as well. as we take a look at these, does anybody have support for some of these? For example, amount of time a middle school student really should be online during this. So the recommendations are this. So K through, or early learning through second grade, they're saying minimal time online. It might be just communication to parents about activities, and then if the parent chooses to have some activities for their children online, that's fine, but nothing really like assigned, so to speak, if possible. Now, if there's continuity of learning and the students all know how to jump on, I know a lot of first graders who use Google Classroom, and that's just part of the way that they do business, then that's a little bit different. As we start going up, so from 3 to 5, they're saying probably 2 to 3 hours, and then middle school, they're saying 3 to 5 max hours, and then high school no more than like 7 hours. So, and that's too much. I mean, so thinking about there isn't specific expectations. Apparently Nina has a document, and actually I have it on this pandemic. I added their resource on here, but DPI will not tell you specifically this is what you should be doing. There are just some districts who are putting out some supports on hours. But what I do want you to know is that as teachers are planning, they should plan for half the amount of work they typically give students, because it is just so much more work. What we heard when Westosha went through this, some feedback that they gave us is that when they did they did virtual learning days already for snow days. And so what the feedback they got from students is that it was just too much work. I mean, the kids were doing like 13 hours of work. So what we want to think about as we are planning is just be really diligent about less is more right now until you kind of get the cadence of how the day will go for students. The other piece too is plan for variability. So each student is different. So you might do a blanket plan and like, okay, so the class, we're going to look at this, but really be open to feedback from families and from students that, maybe on Tuesday this didn't work because something was going on at home, so really having those open lines of communication as far as planning goes and how much work can actually be done at home. We have no idea if their Wi-Fi can handle 4 devices now working all day long because their parents are home, the students are home, everybody's trying to do some work. So, the other piece is if you're going to create lessons and do that digital workflow through either your LMS or your Google Classroom, just make sure that that might be that communication piece, but that some of the activity can be done offline. That's just too much. It's just, we don't want screen time like that. So when I say like 7 hours max for high school, that doesn't mean all online. That means like just the workload. But even that, like I said, I would start very minimal and then start working up so they get that, the stamina to do this kind of work at home.
This is Mary Jo again. I also think it's really important that we send some kind of exemplar schedule out so that people are thinking about how much time between breaks and during breaks, what kinds of ways kids can get up and move and be active and do other things. The other thing I think is important is not all just individual, independent work, but how can we mix it up across a day with some independent work time and then some collaborative work time where maybe they're connecting with other students in their class to do some collaboration time. None of us are really used to this situation of being so isolated. And I feel like especially our young adolescents and our young children, they're not used to being away from their social groups. So how can we recreate some of that in an online atmosphere so that they're continuing to engage and connect, so that their mental health is being taken care of as well as their academic learning?
Awesome. Yep, that is so true. Absolutely. They need to be face to face if they can, when they can, and they need to exercise, get outside, get some fresh air. I mean, all of that, right? And so do we. We need to take care of ourselves as we go through this process, for sure. So speaking of that, Mary Jo, thank you for talking about maybe an exemplar. So the good news is this, everybody. I talked to Denise. I emailed Denise Waters from the Seattle North Shore district, and she shared with me a whole folder of what they did in the first couple of weeks. Now they're on hold right now. The whole district is closed. So, but prior to that, they were doing continuity of learning. So I just checked my other computer here, and she said, yes, green light, share it with everybody. So what I'm going to do right now is share with you a folder of all of their planning documents. And what I want, you know what, I'm going to get it up first. So if somebody wants to talk for a little bit, let me get it on this document. I'm going to show you what's in there specifically so you can start kind of picking out the pieces that may work for your district. So Valerie, what's going on out there? Do you want to take it over just for a second?
Sure. So there's a couple more questions in the document that I don't know that we've fully addressed. Maybe we can spend a little bit of time for those of you that are in districts talking about what you're seeing, certainly for our consultants to talk about some of the best practices as well. So question one, you should have the note about our discussion tomorrow. And also Tracy posted DPI special ed team, the website. There's a question about how we're supporting performance-based content and skills. We had briefly talked about using video and some of those tools, but I'm curious from the group, what else are you seeing that's working well?
I think one of the things we mentioned before was video.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as much as we can to have some type of video component. Most of us have that in our hand with our phones. Very easy to take videos and use that as a performance maybe assessment.
Absolutely. And there are some really nice virtual project-based schools. You know, the EdVisions online in Minnesota has some fabulous resources, and I can pop that in the document. Certainly the Buck Institute has some really good stuff as well. Then moving on, I think we talked about the amount of time online. Still the equity issue, and that's coming up a lot in the social media sites too, for students that don't have Wi-Fi at home or have limited Wi-Fi at home. How do we meet those needs? I think we've all seen that Charter is offering, is it Spectrum? Charter Spectrum is offering free internet to families. So that's a consideration. Libraries are starting to close, so we don't have that, I guess, unless anyone else has ideas. The hotspots, I think teachers or people can get to. However, if you live in an area where there's not good cell service, that's a concern. So I'm going to go back to the Spectrum as probably the one that I would think of in areas where Spectrum is a service.
What I heard yesterday is that we are pretty well covered in Wisconsin, except for the northern, probably 3 CESAs up there, you know, those northern CESAs right up on the top. They're still having a hard time getting access out into those rural areas, the Northwoods. So in our area, though, I'm wondering if we're pretty well covered.
I think so too. Then this is popping up in the social media group too, as we're starting to settle into the norm, I think. what are the expectations of our educators in thinking about time online, office hours, if we're looking at this as sort of a long-term work and not maybe just a week of creating virtual resources, what is that starting to look like? Some people I know at least in the social media groups are saying that they have to post office hours and they're expected, some are expected to actually physically go in, but the majority are asked to share to work a number of hours during the day. I guess, for many years we've said education needs to change, and well, here we go, right? So they're wondering what that looks like. And from an administrative perspective, how do we ensure that they're safe, happy, but serving our kids? And then
I think that educators are grappling with now too is that management, because they may have kids of their own now that are home. So how are they working from home while managing their own kids and the content for their coursework? So it's interesting, and actually that Facebook group has been nice for teachers to actually have those conversations, like, how are you doing it? What are what are some best practices for this? And so I would really encourage all educators to get on that group if possible.
And I think the next one's very valid as well. There are so many activities and resources popping up in social media and elsewhere. And is there just a nice repository of tried and true vetted resources that we might share? I think people are starting to become overwhelmed with, the hundreds that they're seeing and getting suggestions for, but is there a vetted list of these resources for certain purposes that we recommend?
And absolutely, we can do something like that. What am I wondering is, though, for all of you in the districts, is what are the tools that you are already using? Because right now, like I mentioned before, we want to go slow, right? And this is not only just for staff, but this is for students, this is for families. So just thinking about what are those core tools you are already leveraging, either as a district or in your classroom. So for example, if you have a learning management system, continue to use that if the students are used to using that. If you are using Google Classroom, continue to use that. If you're not using either of those, you might want to think of, okay, can I create just a Google document? And on that Google document, can I put in some links or some different directions and share that document out? You could use slides. You'll see when we look at Denise's folder that they created, they used sheets, they used slides. So just Google, accessing your Google apps, things that, that are commonly used, that students may also understand, and parents as well. So if we get all fancy and start using new things, it might really create some frustration. Again, it's that equity piece. But what we did, we are talking to some who have been doing this for a little bit. So they start slow, right? But they might add a new tool, after kids kind of get complacent, or, you know what I mean? Like just to motivate and to try something new. Yeah, I was just thinking of what they're doing out in Hollywood Hills, and the only new tool that they added was a video conferencing tool, which was Zoom, because they wanted to be face-to-face, and they hadn't used that tool as a whole. And so that was the only new tool that they added as they began their journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then I think we're starting to get into some of the logistical questions around assessment, coaching new teachers. What do those things look like beyond online activities for our kids, but what are some of the management pieces looking like in a virtual setting?
It's interesting with question number 8. So should we be grading or giving feedback?
What we know in online learning best practices is feedback, and from Hattie, of course, is feedback is mission critical. So it's interesting that they're questioning that, because we know that that's a very critical piece, and certainly the engagement. So if a student is doing something online, that engagement needs to be even more so reinforced so that they know somebody is there.
Yeah, actually, from what I'm hearing from feedback is exactly that, Val, that more feedback, more feedback is required, or suggested, or highly, yeah, it really is important, because students need to, whether they're seeing it in writing or hearing it from you, again, it's because of that isolation piece. So they really need feedback. They need feedback from their peers. So how can we create the conditions so that students can have conversation and be connecting? So the feedback is huge. And you know what? It just really depends as far as assessment goes, is are you doing continuity of learning, or are you doing kind of the learning resources enrichment right now? Enrichment and connecting to learning resources. And if it's optional, I mean, certainly teachers can go on. It's totally optional for the teachers as well. It would be great for teachers to continue to connect with their students. But if you're doing continuity of learning and you have specific learning outcomes, then they need feedback, they need assessment pieces. All of that needs to be part of the learning process.
I do think what you said, Beth, around getting students to practice giving each other feedback is a really powerful tool as well. And I think many of the online tools have capability for this. Even just in Google Docs, having them do some shared work and then give each other feedback, or share within a small group and give each other feedback. And the teacher can see the feedback given, so there's a way to monitor it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is some care. We're definitely going to have to dig into digital citizenship and responsibility as we are fully immersing ourselves in this virtual environment. So absolutely supporting them with sentence prompts and, what is appropriate feedback. And, even talking about feedback like, well, that's nice. And talking about how we have to dig into more specifics and details for it to be some really positive or constructive feedback, and how to give constructive feedback. So that's going to be all part of this process as well. And this is great for them to be learning this.
I don't know if you all saw that Tracy posted something from, I don't know how to say the name, Vuelo and Vetter, around special education. If you open that document, it has some really specific details around what legal people are saying needs to happen for special education. It's in the
chat.
box.
You guys can see it right here up on my screen too. Oh no, you can't see my chat, can you? But anyway, if you just scroll up to 1254, that's when Tracy actually posted something like that. That is really, all of these resources, just so you know, we'll take these resources out of the chat and we'll put them on a document for you so that you will have them in one place. We know that you are being bombarded with so many resources, so as much as we can do to consolidate that for you, we will do that. And then I'm back in the chat right now. I see that Stephanie has posted if anybody has questions specific to specialized servicing and staffing. So we're talking like OT, PT, those kind of positions, and how they continue to be working with students. You can see that Stephanie's email is in here, or her phone number. Stephanie, are you on? She said she was going to be popping in and out, so I'm not sure if Stephanie is on right now. But feel free to contact Stephanie. She will help you in those situations as well.
I think another area of urgency is to ensure the continuity of school counseling and mental health supports, to be looking at mental health prevention and how the teachers are going to have that in their forefront when they're directly engaging with the students and the families to connect them back to pupil services and their school-based mental health supports, and then connect them to the community therapists and the other county services for crisis. I'd be interested in the best practices for that.
Let's put that down. Is any district out there right now, do you have any documentation that you've been sharing out to families, any kind of communication, or just support for your educators as far as that goes? I was just looking down at some of our resources. You can see talking to kids. Yeah, I wonder. And so what you're asking is actually the support for educators as they are planning, how they can incorporate that. Am I right? Was it Katina?
Hi, yeah, Katrina. So an example is like Adam's friendship, 5 years of creating a really good model of internal and external referrals for mental health concerns.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the model that they have might be one that other schools could begin to take a look at. So often there's an informal process with a teacher maybe grabbing a pupil services or a nurse and saying, hey, I'm concerned about that kid. And then we have the next level of engaging the parents and trying to get them a more thorough assessment, and then possibly a referral to community mental health, child psychiatry, their own primary care provider. So I'm the school-based mental health project manager for Purdue Richland Center and Ithaca Schools. We're going to continue with our services for the universal level, some videos out there to allow the parents and students to know that they can continue to contact pupil services, to contact myself just for some education and that universal support. And then the more select and targeted, we'll be doing direct phone calls and emails to see how they're doing. You know, some families are not going to be driving an hour to the clinic, or they may not even drive to the therapy appointment because they are practicing the isolation. And we just need to check in on that and continue to stay in connection with the local community mental health therapists and the hospitals to ensure the kids are getting to appointments, because the telehealth world is not yet set up. My telehealth world is set up so I can help these schools and have some more direct supports.
Oh, that's just so true. All of that it's heavy stuff. We've got to be thinking about every single aspect, right? Like teledoc and telehealth and just making sure that all of our families have the support that they need. Thank you so much for sharing all of that, and we'll continue to provide any kind of resource that we come across, and maybe together we can come up with some resources for educators as they start supporting. I mean, the biggest thing that I'm hearing out there is start with empathy, empathy, empathy. So really kind of connecting with those families to know what are their needs, whether it's academic, SLE or SEL, you know, all of those pieces, physical. So thank you for mentioning that, Katrina.
And I wonder if along those lines too, you know, how many million children are online, probably not incredibly supervised all the time. Just some of the digital citizenship skills and keeping our kids safe online needs to be a consideration as well.
Right. Absolutely. So I'm going back to question number 10, how are schools handling attendance? So would we have anybody who is online talk about that? What are you doing? You need to have some kind of attendance procedure.
I wonder if Cassie, if you're still on from Williams Bay, could you speak to that? You have a nice summary in the chat room.
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. So I know at our elementary school on our remote learning webpage, there is going to be, I don't know if it's a Google Doc or a sheet or what it is, but it's a way for all the elementary students or for the really little ones, their parents, just to account for them and that they're accessing that website. I think we only have a handful of families that don't have internet access that will be calling and just checking in on them. Then our teachers are at least making a weekly contact with families. And then I've asked for our students in special education, their case managers will be making daily contact with those students. I do think it's easier at our middle school, high school level where we're already more set up with Google Classroom for those teachers to kind of take attendance and those sort of things. And I think at that level, we're looking at more of a block schedule so that students aren't overwhelmed with every subject every day. So we'll just have to wait and see and kind of work out the kinks and see what works.
Mm-hmm.
We do ask if nobody's heard from a family or made contact for them to contact our student services team as well.
Great.
Great, thanks. And Delavan, do you want to share in terms of your own attendance procedures?
Hi, this is Kelly. Can you hear me okay?
Hi, Kelly. Yep.
So at the elementary level, we have a shared Google document with all students' names listed by homeroom teacher. And we use Class Dojo as one of our platforms at the elementary. And it requires parents then to be in contact with their teachers. They can reach out to teachers in multiple ways. It can be through written communication, photos, videos. I'll tell you, I've seen a lot of photos and videos of some fun things kids are working on and enjoying while they've been away these few days. And then the teachers go in on that shared Google Doc and put their initials behind the student's name for each of the days based on what they're seeing and so on. Of course, we have families that are not on Dojo, and we have families that are have little or limited access to the internet. So we did send some packets of information and things for kids to do on Friday in anticipation of a potential closure for a few weeks. And again, it's really the parents' responsibility to keep us in the loop. However, we too have families that we're not seeing or hearing from at all. So our student services staff, myself, and others are reaching out to them. And we're trying to divide that up so that it's not all of us reaching out to every family and hounding them all of the time. Mm-hmm. Middle and high school staff, I can't speak to that, but I know there's at least a middle school, some personnel that can speak to that if you would like.
And so Hank is saying that at the middle school, each child has 7 teachers. So they're initialing a Google spreadsheet each day. And if there has been no contact in 2 days, then the homeroom teacher reaches out. And then it goes to student services to connect.
I'm just going to add these to the doc so you can all see those as well. We're all coming up with systems. I know sometimes it's based on students handing in work. I love this. If you don't hear from somebody for a couple days, of course you need to reach out. So what does that look like? And even being thoughtful about not bombarding a family with 10 people contacting them. but really being cohesive and working that out as a team. All right, so I think I was going backwards on these questions, but what offline activities might we use and how do we support those? I would definitely take a look at those the Facebook group, take a look at Twitter. We have people who are posting constantly, and we can also make a repository here of what we see and kind of kick those back out to you too. So we'll keep this question in mind as we go through. And then we already went through this one. So what I want us to do before we leave today is to go back to our pandemic planning. You should have that up on a tab. If you don't, here's the bit.ly, the shortened URL, if you'd like to take a look at that and bring it up. Where it says, if you scroll down on the document to continuity of learning, I added Denise's folder from Hollywood Hills, and you could go ahead and open that. And that's not the one. So Valerie, do you want to talk for a minute? I will get the right one in there. Obviously,
Yes, I absolutely will. So we're just curious too, in terms of, thinking that perhaps this is a couple weeks, perhaps it's longer. How can we support you having, check-ins synchronously? Would that be something people might be interested in? We know that you are busy and this is a whole new world for all of us. And so we want to make sure that you know that we're here to support you in any way that we possibly can. So I'm just curious, from Williams Bay to Delavan to, I think, Oregon. So, how can we help you? And I don't have any toilet paper, or I would bring that to you. But other things that we can do.
So are you asking for toilet paper then, Val?
I have a couple rolls left. I'm good for a bit, but
all right.
No, it's just a bad quarantine joke. Sorry.
Okay, we should be back. I had 2 folders open, so now we should have the right link. Let me just check it. Yeah, so like Val said, we really want to know how we can support you. We have some ideas from some of the questions that you added, and certainly please put those in the chat or on the document and we can continue. All right. Here we go. Let's see if this works. So when she shared this, I thought she was just going to share a few things, a few planning documents. She actually shared her whole folder. And so as you take a look at some of these, you can go in to different areas. The one thing I just wanted to let you know is down here where we have the weeks. These weeks up here are, of course, we haven't had those yet. Take a look at week 1 and 2 and some of the resources that they've created. That's what we're in. We're in week 1, right? So what are some of the ways that they have connected with their students? You can see they created some learning plans and documents first. The second week, she said they started to make some revisions. So remember, this is for continuity of learning. So you'll see kind of like their plans. And what she said is that teamwork was critical. So the grade levels coming together, anybody who you can come together and work as a team, because then they didn't all have to create themselves. Again, we don't want the isolation. So you'll see some videos on the bottom here. They took turns with videos. And if you don't know how to make videos real quick, you can do use something called Screencastify, and it's a Google extension. It is the easiest thing to use for, you know, getting a screencast like I'm talking through now, and I could be recording this, or just even a webcam, you know, just of your face. You can record just talking in there too. So that's called Screencastify. So anyway, I wanted you to take a look at that. And then the second thing, just to see how they evolved, take a look at week 2 as well, and those resources. We'll see. Now they're using Google Slides to share. So anyway, take a look at these resources, dig into them when you can, you make sense of those, and you'll see to do each day.
And Beth, it looks like we need permission to access that folder.
Okay, thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
I'll change that as well. Okay, I will do that. I'll make sure that you guys can get into it. I hope it's not a permission from her, but I'll figure that out. If I can get into it, you should be able to get into it. So I may have to add it to my drive, and then we should be all set. But I don't want to take your time to do that. You will have these resources in a few minutes. Mm-hmm. I just wanted to say thank you to everybody. We're going to just wrap this up right now. And if you are interested, we have another webinar coming up at 1:30 where we're talking more about educational moves and how they can go virtual today. So we'll talk more about that then. So thank you so much for joining us today. We are here for you, just so that you know that. Please reach out to any of us. All of our consultants are ready to help support in any way that we can. So have a great afternoon.
And we will, the 2 asks were tools to support staff, to take care of themselves, as well as kind of a vetted repository of best practice online tools.
Okay, great. Yes, we can do that.
Absolutely.
And we will have follow-up, by the way, also. We'll be sending the recording out. We'll get these resources in the chat also in a document. And so look forward to that. So have a great afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining.